would come as close to the front as you're comfortable, that'll facilitate our discussion, question and answer portion. Okay. Go ahead.
Well, hi, I'm Tom Warnock, and I just wanted to do the briefest introduction as to why the church is involved. It's just because we realized there was a need about a year and a half ago, and we thought the best way to get the ball rolling was just simply to be a host to community participation in getting these forums together. And we've been meeting monthly, the last Sunday of every month, and we will continue to do that. And all the meetings are open to the public. And Jenny, help me out. What time are they?
4 o'clock.
4 p.m. on the last Sunday of each month. So feel free to attend any, all, or none of the meetings. Tonight is a panel discussion, and before we do, I had one announcement. We've been without water this week, so if you need to use a toilet, go ahead. The toilet is downstairs. They're nearest. Use the bathroom nearest the exit, and there are pails in there of water, and there's a small dipper there that you can flush. Just pour it right in the toilet bowl after you're done. If you need to do it more than once, that's fine, whatever you choose. We have a water tank out back that we can replenish, so don't hesitate if you need to. And I want to introduce, we're lucky, very fortunate, to have a new pastor at the church. He really started the 1st of September. And so I'd like to introduce Joe Welker.
Hey, I'm Joe. I'll keep this short because we know we've got a great discussion up. And I'm Joe. It's just been wonderful to be here the past 3 weeks getting to know everybody. And I know this has been an important issue from day one that I've been here. So I'm really excited to learn more about what has been already going on. And I'll just leave it at that and hand it over to Linda and our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe and Tom. My name is Linda Ramsell, and I've been attending these meetings, and we're here tonight to talk about accessory dwelling units. The purpose of the panel tonight is to share information. We're going to have a chance to ask questions and really try to get our community thinking about accessory dwelling units and what might be feasible for each of us. So thank you so much for coming, and especially thank you to our panelists. I'll introduce the three of them. Jean Lowell will speak first, then Patrick Shattuck of Rural Edge will speak next, and then Patrick Larson will speak last about the nitty-gritty. So we're going to go from sort of the general concept to the very specific. Each panelist will speak for 10 to 15 minutes, and then we will break for some questions from the audience, and we'll sort of gauge, I'll sort of try to read the room, and at some point we'll break for refreshments and more informal conversation. And I'm gonna try to be respectful of the time so that everybody has a chance to go home on time now that it's getting dark earlier. And we are recording this tonight, so please keep the side talk amongst yourselves absent, I guess, I would ask, so that we can all hear the panelists and that the people who, we haven't determined exactly how we'll access the recording, but we'll figure that out and let people know, and we want to have a good recording, so if people can keep that in mind as we're talking and asking questions, we'll all appreciate that. So, thank you for coming, and thank you, Jean, and I'm just going to turn the mic over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for having me. This is really a very exciting community project, and the people who are putting it together, which I guess is all of you, it's a collective effort. You really have something to be proud of, and I think you can serve as a model for other communities as well. So I hope I can offer something to you that you find useful. I am going to read a prepared statement because I don't want to meander, which I'm inclined to do, and I don't want to forget to make the points that I think are maybe the most relevant. I got involved with the ADU grant program as a means of achieving a goal that I have been working towards for a few years without success before the ADU project presented itself. The seemingly insurmountable obstacles that I encountered during those early years are a story in and of themselves, but I don't think they're particularly relevant. If you want to hear some anecdotes, I'm happy to share them with you later. The goal of the ADU project was and still is in the central Vermont area, and I assume it's the same. I'm going to be learning right along with you as the other presenters talk about their project, is to increase housing stock, most specifically for low-income folks. I had my own related but personal goals myself, and those were to provide secure, safe, and affordable housing for my daughter and my young granddaughter. My daughter is Sierra Lowell, her daughter is Aquila. Maybe some of you remember her because they rented from Ann Morse and Kevin Gregoire for a while. This is a few years ago. My other goal was to provide housing for myself and my husband in our old age. And I've captured the project succinctly in pictures and a little bit of narrative in a book that I've put on the back table with the snacks to kind of breathe life into the project, if you care to check it out later. So in order to achieve those two goals, on the one hand, I was willing to let my daughter and granddaughter have my house to live in, and so I proceeded to search for alternative housing for my husband and I. But due to the high demand for housing units and an increasingly expensive housing market, we couldn't afford to buy anything, nor could we afford to rent anything that was halfway decent, even given our modest needs. More significantly, we realized we were approaching the age when we might begin having mobility issues. So wheelchair accessible housing became a very real need in the future. And as you may know, it's almost impossible to find. So my existing house did not have the space to renovate or add to it in the existing structure, in the existing footprint. So my husband and I began to explore the possibility of building a small unit on my smaller 0.2 acre plot of land just outside of, well, it's in Montpelier, but the outskirts of Montpelier. Building costs aside, trying to figure out water and sewage hookups, electric supply, road setbacks, etc., because we have serious zoning in Montpelier, was daunting in and of itself. But ultimately, that preliminary research paid off in the end, if only to make clear what was not logistically possible or affordable. Then came the accessory dwelling unit grant program. At the time, and perhaps still, the ADU program was primarily, almost exclusively directed towards people who had space in their existing home that could be renovated into a separate living space. My project differed in that it involved creating a whole new structure, requiring excavating and pouring a foundation, building from the ground up, and installing new electrical and water services. In this sense, my project and what I have to offer you here tonight may not be particularly relevant to what you are considering. Nevertheless, I hope what I have to share with you is helpful in some ways. One of the challenges to making my project happen was the financing piece. I'll speak more about that in a bit, but first I'll talk about the design and building of the unit. I had hoped to build a freestanding unit, but the costs of running new water, sewer lines, and electrical services to a freestanding unit were utterly prohibitive, tens of thousands of dollars. So the unit had to be an addition to the existing structure where it could tie in to existing water, sewer, and electrical services. I hoped to not have to incorporate any part of the existing structure into my ADU. However, property lines and other factors limited the available building space to a 16 by 28 foot footprint. In order to have the living space wheelchair accessible, it was necessary to take a small bedroom from the existing structure and make that an accessible bathroom. I must note that while being functionally wheelchair accessible, my ADU does not meet the Americans with Disabilities Act, so that's an important thing to keep in mind. So it's functionally wheelchair accessible, but not under the requirements of the ADA. Even with the added space taken from the existing structure, that only allowed for a total living space of 558 square feet, to which we were able to add an unheated 42 square foot entryway. Figuring out how to fit a bedroom, kitchen, dining, and sitting area into a 558 square foot area was quite the challenge, especially when needing to maintain wheelchair accessibility. I spent untold hours measuring furniture and figuring possible layout designs that could accommodate the bare bones physical necessities of living while maintaining wheelchair accessibility. It took a design miracle, if I do say so myself. But that's a whole other story that I'm happy to share at a later time with anyone who might be interested. Suffice it to say, I had to tell the builders, who, by the way, the main builder was Sean Eklund, who you also may remember because he lived in your community, and he is a builder extraordinaire. And I know I'm in church, so I hope this isn't sacrilege, but really, he's just about a saint, in my opinion. Suffice it to say, I had to tell the builders that my floor plan layout for walls, doors, and windows did not allow for so much as an inch deviation from the plan, and that was not an exaggeration. Fortunately, they listened, and it was possible. As for the financing of the ADU, that was challenging even with the assistance of the ADU grant program, at least as it was under the program which was available to me in Washington County. My understanding is the terms of that program, and perhaps the terms of the program you'll be working with, differ in some respects from the terms that were available to me at the time. There were certainly some obstacles to overcome in terms of financing the project, but one critically helpful component of the ADU program was a $10,000 0% interest loan that could cover startup costs, permitting fees, architectural drawings, etc., for those who couldn't afford to cover those costs prior to obtaining other financing. Beyond that, participants in the program had to come up with the full cost of building the ADU in advance. The ADU program I participated in required the owner to pay the construction costs up front and then be awarded the grant money once the tenant assumed occupancy. The grant would cover half the cost of building the ADU up to a maximum grant of $20,000, and I know that that's changed significantly. Since most ADUs didn't involve building a whole new unit, most projects cost considerably less than my unit cost. In my case, given limited access to funding, I had to come up with creative ways to minimize the costs of building the unit. Those cost-saving measures included the donation of goods and services, quote, sweat equity, and purchasing many used and recycled materials and appliances, windows, doors, etc. The total cost of the unit, including an estimated value of those cost-saving measures, came to approximately $130,000 to build and make the unit ready for occupancy. That was before the cost of labor and materials skyrocketed with the advent of COVID, and I guess have continued to rise, including rising interest rates. So I was very fortunate. I couldn't do what I did today. My husband, am I over?
No, you
Okay.
were in about 8 minutes.
Okay, good. My husband and I are not considered low income. How, I don't know. We live on fixed income. We're both retired. Well, we're the working retired, if you understand that. But, except, for part-time jobs. Fortunately, I have equity in my home and excellent credit, so I was able to refinance the mortgage I had on my home. Again, a whole other somewhat harrowing story I'm happy to share with anyone who might be interested. Had I not been able to refinance my mortgage, the project could not have gone forward. This might be controversial, so I apologize up front, but for me it's very real. I consider this finance upfront requirement of the homeowner, while perhaps necessary, to be an unfortunate barrier to participating in the ADU grant program, in that homeowners have to be able to afford to finance the building of the unit upfront. That eliminates what I think would be a considerable number of folks who would otherwise be willing and able to add inventory to the affordable housing market by participating in the program. Also, unless folks are committed to the cause of affordable housing, those who could afford to finance such units might be tempted to build on their own and then rent at the higher market rate, and I think that would be most unfortunate, and I think would defeat the purposes of the ADU program. In my case, when I worked the numbers, the increase in my monthly mortgage, which was already considerable, the property taxes, also considerable in Montpelier, and other costs related to the ADU housing unit was going to be greater than the rent I would be allowed to charge under the terms of the ADU program. And in the long run, my losses would exceed the amount of the grant I would receive. So this is something to take a close look at. Again, I don't know what the terms are of this project you'd be working with. I think it's very different from what I had available to me. I wasn't looking to make money on the rental unit, but I couldn't afford to not cover the costs. Had it not been family that I was doing this for, and my husband's and my own willingness and ability to cut costs by means of our own, quote, sweat equity and other cost-saving measures mentioned earlier, and had I not otherwise been committed to the cause of affordable housing, this financial aspect of the grant program that I participated in would have dissuaded me from participating. I don't want the financial aspect of my experience to dissuade anyone from going forward with building an ADU if you're able to do so. I surely don't want that to be the result of my presentation here tonight. I just think it's important to go into this venture with as much information as possible and with eyes wide open. Despite that one aspect of the ADU grant program, I am tremendously grateful the program was available to me, and I am eternally grateful for the tremendous help that Tyler Maas, who's with the Vermont State Housing Program, who oversaw this program in Washington County. I could not have navigated the bureaucracy and the paperwork and all that without him. So that's it. I have prepared a breakdown of some numbers in terms of the financing and donated goods and services and recycled materials, that I was able to put together to make this project happen. But, if those particulars are of any interest to any of you, I can talk to you afterwards. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean. That was really Thank you so much. That was super informative. And now we'll turn it over to Patrick Shattuck.
Good evening. I'm Patrick Shattuck. I'm the Executive Director of Rural Edge. We are the affordable housing organization serving the Northeast Kingdom. So you may be familiar with Rural Edge. We own and operate about 700 units of perpetually affordable rental housing. And one thing we hear all the time is there is a more need for affordable housing. And thankfully, housing is having its moment, and there's been lots of funding allocated for it. We have, in addition to our own units that we develop and operate, and we're working in this community to bring more. We're working in Greensboro to bring rental housing online there, so desperately needed. But we also have a homeownership center. And our homeownership center works with homeowners to both provide education and also funding opportunities to help them improve their own homes, and with some relatively new programs, fund private landlords and homeowners for accessory dwelling units. So there had been a lot of talk in the current administration about bringing resources to private landlords to help them bring units online. And it wasn't until COVID came that funds were developed and a program was rolled out. It was called the Rehousing Recovery Program, and it gave landlords grants of up to $30,000 to bring vacant units back online. So we know we have lots of rental units that may have had a tenant in the past who did some damage and a landlord opted to not rent that back out. Or maybe there had been a landlord who'd been in business for a long time and had been keeping units vacant and sold it to the next generation of mom and pop landlord. And this program allowed us to provide grants to private landlords to bring those units back online, address health and safety issues, and in exchange, they agreed to either make an effort to lease through coordinated entry, which was housing folks who were experiencing homelessness, who would pay no more than HUD's published fair market rent, or they would rent to a household with an income of less than 80% of area median income. We saw a huge response to that. There were landlords who realized that they had assets and there was a need to invest in them. And so we saw a lot of units come online. The program was really successful, especially in areas like the Northeast Kingdom, where property values for multifamily properties, especially as compared to other areas of the state, are relatively low. So $30,000 has a lot more value here than in Burlington to a private landlord. The program was really successful, and we first used CARES Act funding, then it was extended through ARPA funding, and now it's been so successful that it's part of the general budget. So it's funded with state funds, and it has been expanded to not only have this opportunity for private landlords, but it's added an accessory dwelling unit program, which is really great. And it said, you know what, an accessory dwelling unit, we want to incentivize folks, homeowners, even more. We want to give them more flexibility and more resources. So homeowners, to develop an accessory dwelling unit, and as defined by the legislature, it is a self-contained unit on the same property as a primary residence. You can only have one accessory dwelling unit for one single family home, and it has to be smaller than the primary residence. That for those units, we can provide grants of up to $50,000. In addition, there is no income level served. You can, as in your case, lease to family members, but you cannot charge more than HUD's fair market rent. So it will be an affordable housing unit but it's not going to be tied to a household's income. It's giving that homeowner the control to feel comfortable in their house with someone that they feel comfortable living, coexisting with on the same property, and giving them more control. That's a 5-year restriction. It is recorded in the land records through a covenant, and it is remarkably about the easiest program to apply for. Because it is state general funds, lots of the paperwork that probably existed with the program you used has gone away. So our application process, and we did have handouts that both have annual reports for Rural Edge and all the materials, as well as frequently asked questions about the accessory dwelling unit program. We have a simple application, but we're going to look to you to come up with the plan. You talked about all the legwork. We're going to incentivize you to do that legwork, to come up with your design, to make sure it's something that works for you. So as an example, Rural Edge just commissioned a housing needs assessment for the entire Northeast Kingdom, because we know that since COVID, there had been a whole lot of changes. Houses don't linger on the market. Local folks can't buy housing. There had been lots of changes, and all the numbers we had, all the data, throw it out the window, because we're in a whole new world since COVID. And so one thing, some interesting conclusions, the Northeast Kingdom has a shortage of housing units of about 4,000 housing units. The bulk of those are 1-bedroom units needed, because our population, we have households that are much smaller than they once were in the Northeast Kingdom. So we have a housing stock, think 4 and 5 bedroom farmhouses with attached carriage barns, attached barns that are housing 1 or 2 people. And yet our household sizes need 1-bedroom units. So we've got this conflict between the housing stock and the housing need. So the accessory dwelling unit really is positioned to help those folks who are carrying the burden of a house, maintaining a house. In many cases, or especially in this area, we know it's an older housing stock, may not be as energy efficient, costs more to operate. And this gives them the opportunity to add another unit either in that building or, like you did, a new structure on the same site. So it really adds flexibility for you. We do have staff who come out and evaluate your property, look at your plans. You are going to be working and getting bids for the work. You talked about getting money up front. We're able to advance up to 20% of the funds early on, so that if you have a contractor who says, I need a deposit for materials, we know it's more expensive, we can get them that deposit early on. We do another draw at 50% completion with the next 30%, so that we're able to get the resources out to help the homeowner manage those cash flow issues. In addition to the accessory dwelling unit funds, we have some funds that are called healthy home funds. And Patrick's going to talk about the challenges of rural infrastructure on site, but these funds are available in addition to cover costs associated with water and wastewater upgrades.
What was that second program called?
It's the Healthy Homes Fund. So basically it's all covered under the same application to us, and I believe there are actually applications in your packets. And Wendy Moran, who's our new Director of Home Ownership, is here with us, but she's in her second week with us, so the business card that's attached is mine. So that's my direct line, and we will make sure to get you answers if you're interested, and talk through this with you, because it's a great opportunity for you. The funds flow quickly. There are funds identified for this. We administer this program for the entire Northeast Kingdom. So, if you're interested, if you know of someone who might be a good fit, we're happy to have the discussion with you. It's interesting. People have lots of questions and ideas that may not be the exact fit for the program. These are state funds, so if we have any questions, we go to our funders and we say, how are you going to feel about this? Before we give some feedback, let's all think outside of the box, but we look for their direction so that we're very clear with you folks, so that we're having a discussion, so that we're working in partnership to address some of those challenges. Because it is a daunting task. And so by providing resources, the legislature has really seen that, we are in this together. That Rural Edge can develop housing, but folks are maintaining their own homes and they can be developing housing, because we've got a real challenge, and it's impacting our families, it's impacting our parents, our kids, and it's impacting people in our communities who want to live here, who see people who come out, this great enthusiasm, this great energy, this great supportive community, and want to be part of it. So we're really anxious to work with you to move your projects forward, and look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you. And Wendy, will you just stand up so people know where to find you with the materials? Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. And now to our other Patrick for the evening. Go ahead, Patrick Larson. Thank you for being here.
So that was the optimistic portion of the presentation. My name is Patrick Larson. I'm a Vermont licensed septic designer. I've done hundreds of septic designs around here. Interestingly, I did the one for the saplings who were in the basement of this church. So when I heard the water wasn't operating, I thought this was all a ruse to trap me here. But I'll get out of here quick once this is over.
You got a getaway car?
It's a Volkswagen bus, so no. The first thing I want to do is just talk about some jargon, some wastewater jargon, which it's a term that I'm going to use over and over, and it's called the design flow. When a designer designs a septic system, we take a couple things into account. Well, several things, but the two main things are the soils, which we won't be worrying about that today, and the other is the amount of water that's going to the leach field. And we're not going to talk about municipal sewers, are you on a municipal? Yeah. So we're up here, we don't worry about that too much. We've all got our own system. So the way that water use is calculated, and that water use is called the design flow, it's an estimate. This is all in the state rules based on how many people are in the house. And the way they determine how many people are living in the house is how many bedrooms the house has. So the state assumes that there are 2 people per bedroom for the first 3 bedrooms, and then 1 person per bedroom for every bedroom after that. The magic number is 70 gallons per day per person. So for every bedroom for the first 3 bedrooms, it's 140 gallons per day. So a typical 3-bedroom house, we would have to design a leach field that takes 420 gallons per day. So that's your design flow, and we'll bring that up again. There are 2 basic things that are going to permit or trigger needing a state wastewater water supply permit, which I believe in most cases is the only state permit that you're going to need. One is if you're changing the operational requirements of the leach field or the water supply, which basically means you're burying new sewer lines or water lines. The other is if you're increasing the design flow. So I think I'm going to try and draw some stuff up here and just throw some scenarios out there that are very common. I've done several of these ADU projects this year already. The program is very popular. There's a lot of people taking advantage of it. So, call this a parcel, and what most of us are starting out with, we have a house somewhere probably close to the road, we have a leach field back here, and we have a drill well.
Where's the road? Let's just say the road's right here.
So, you have a water line here, you probably have a septic tank, we're not going to worry about that. So this is your typical, we're going to call this a 3-bedroom. Just making that easy. let's say you want to add an ADU to this lot. We're adding a bedroom. What's that going to do?
Increase your flow.
Increase the design flow. We need a wastewater permit. And unlike the rural edge application, the wastewater permit application is not easy. It's a process. Basically, you're going to need site plans, you're going to need engineering drawings, you're going to need to notify neighbors. It's a process that can take weeks to months. Anyway, so we have let's just call it a one-bedroom ADU here. What you're going to need for this is going to need its own fully compliant leach field, which means this has to meet the rules, the letter of the law as they exist today. If that's an in-ground system, you're also going to need a replacement area. You're going to need a drilled well, and you're also going to need to find a replacement area for this home that does not need to be built, but the state requires that it would show that this house can take care of their wastewater in case their leach field ever fails. So you can see this becomes pretty onerous right away. And if you're on a small lot, there's a good chance this is not even remotely possible.
If you're adding to the house, it's the same requirements as opposed to a separate building.
Yep, so we'll all talk about that. So this is like worst case scenario, right? If you have, anything more than 3 or 4 acres, this is probably doable. Anything less than that, it's going to be an uphill climb.
You can't use the same well?
You can, yeah.
You can.
We'll talk about that too. Yeah. So, let's say, and we'll just address these questions as they come, I guess. Let's say you want to share the well. Now, this well has to meet certain criteria. One, you have to do water quality testing. There's about, say, 11 constituents that you need to sample for: bacteria, nitrates, uranium, a whole bunch of things. The other one that people sometimes have a hard time meeting is we are now imposing new yield requirements on this well. So there's a term called instantaneous peak demand, which is basically we need to make sure that this well has enough yield to deliver adequate water to both these places in the situation where all the fixtures are actually running water at the time. So what the state says, this is all in the rules, you have to have 5 gallons per minute per residence that well is hooked up to. So this well has to be at least 10 gallons a minute. The other quirk is friendly about the wastewater rules. If your well log says your well gets 20 gallons a minute, or whatever your well log says, the state only accepts 50%. So if your well log says this gets 10 gallons per minute, the state's going to say it's 5 gallons per minute. So we're short. You can still do this, but what we have to do is we have to design water storage, like a cistern in one of these places, to make up for the lack of yield.
It doesn't matter how many people actually live in the house. Like in her example, it was 3.
It's all based on the number of bedrooms.
So if you had 4 bedrooms between the 2 buildings, it doesn't matter how many people really live there.
No.
You turn that into an office.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that too. Yeah. So, as you can see, there's so many variables in this thing. There's a lot of different ways to go. If you're seriously thinking about one of these projects, my advice is very early on in the process, call a septic designer and start working through these options and try and figure out the best way through it, maybe the most economical way through it.
How much do you charge to have that conversation with somebody?
Most of the time I don't charge, just have a conversation, unless I have to drive, 50 miles. And a lot of times you can have it over the phone too. But it's nice, it's good to get on site and just see what we're working with, see where the property lines are. The other things that can affect this, let's say your neighbor has a drilled well right here, and it wipes out half your lot with an isolation shield around that well. There's just so many variables. So things get complicated pretty quick.
What's the cost of the worst case scenario? When it's that 50 grand is Your original drawing?
Yeah, so this guy has his own well.
Yeah.
So, again, it really depends on what we have for soils.
Yeah.
So that's getting into it. Let's say,
Some clay.
worst case scenario, you have a big mound system with pre-treatment, the whole thing can cost the entire $50,000 that, they're offering up. Does that grant include septic?
The healthy homes, we can add on to it, which covers water and sewer.
There we go.
What's the limit on the healthy homes?
It is, I don't want to quote
Okay.
what it is,
Okay.
but it's a substantial amount.
So there's another, this is an aside, there's another healthy homes project, or grant, some people call it the ARPA grant, that exists solely for the purpose of replacing failed septic systems and failed water supplies. And they'll give you up to $30,000 if you have a failed system, or if you know someone who has one who's on the kind of the lower end of the economic spectrum. It's a fantastic program. We've done a bunch of those this year too. But that particular program, I don't think has anything to do with this. Is that different than what you're talking about?
We have designated funds just for us to administer,
Okay.
whereas the state has their own
That's
fund
a
as
little
well.
different. Yeah. So, one other thing we can do, and someone has alluded to this, remember what I said, one of the triggers is if we increase the design flow, what would be a way that we can add an ADU without increasing the design flow?
Yeah, take the bedroom out of the house.
Darlene, get rid of a bedroom.
Start with a big house.
Yep. So now we have a 2-bedroom house here. It used to be a 3. We've gotten rid of one of the bedrooms. We can now get rid of these 2 leach fields, get rid of this replacement area, and we can connect to this. And this doesn't have to be compliant with today's rules or anything. We're not increasing the amount of water into it, so we're good to go. There's not. Oftentimes you might, it's too far away, we might need to put in a pump station or something like that.
But if all the bedrooms are upstairs, that's gonna be hard.
No, he's saying make it an office. He's not saying actually get rid of it. Right?
Oh, right, yeah,
She's
no.
thinking, you're thinking, remove
I
it.
already have an office.
Make it a library.
Studio, yeah.
Can you pump a bill?
What's that?
Can you pump a bill, would you?
Yeah. I design system that pumps 800 feet uphill. So that is pretty much not an issue.
Can I ask I always do this, it's more complicated. Okay, so, and not to use my own situation, but that's what I know. My well is between where the ADU would be and my septic. Could I put a new septic behind the ADU, which would cover both the existing house and the new unit?
Yep, you can, it's probably, so you're saying your well's right between the two?
Yep.
Yeah. So you can share that well. And again, you're gonna have to go through water quality. It has to get 10 gallons a minute.
Right.
If you're increasing bedrooms or increasing the design flow,
Right.
that well has to be fully compliant.
Yep.
Which basically means it has to be, there can't be a leach field within its isolation shield.
Right.
So I'm not sure whether or not that's the case.
Right, so basically then, because the well is there, there's no way to connect. That was I guess that's my question. There's no way to connect the two because you need your isolation distances between your well and your.
Right, if it's a non-compliant well and you're increasing your design flow, you need to come up with a new water supply.
You change it from a 3-bedroom house to a 2-bedroom house by just saying this is now an office? You're just changing the function?
There's a definition, and this happens all the time. Yeah, this is not a unique scenario where people will.
I need a sewing room.
Here you go. That's it. Some towns are pretty militant about following up and making sure that actually does become a sewing room.
Not here.
Well, and I guess what I would caution you as is when you make those decisions and you go to sell, your buyers are going to be held to that, and it can impact the appraised value. So you want to think about your immediate need and also your long-term planning.
That's a great point, because that's when these things rear their heads, is when you decide to sell the property and you want to sell it as a 3-bedroom house, but there's a wastewater permit on file that says it's a 2-bedroom house, then you got a problem.
And so these scenarios that we're talking about are also why it's a concrete stipulation that there's one ADU unit per even these large houses.
Well, and so that's based on the definition that the legislature passed, and they developed this program to meet their definition. So their definition is part of S-100, which is the new housing bill that makes accessory dwelling units a permitted use anywhere a single-family home is permitted, so that you shouldn't have zoning issues in creating this. But with that, there became specific definitions and limitations.
So I just want to make sure you have a chance to get presented. We're
much
doing
spiel.
the questions on the fly, so why don't we, if we can let Patrick finish, and then we'll open to questions.
I'll just finish up real quick. You guys get it. There's one situation where you actually do not need a wastewater permit to do the ADU. Do all this, still have a drill well, and that is if your ADU is attached to your original building, and there's no increase in design flows, and there's no new piping outside the house. That's a scenario where you don't need a wastewater permit, you don't need any new septic designs. That's kind of a low-hanging fruit right there.
But you have another bedroom.
What's that?
But you do have another bedroom.
No, I'm saying if you take a bedroom out of this house and add it here, but it's attached as opposed to detached. Because if it's detached, remember you gotta run sewer line and water line. In this case, if you're not doing any dirt work outside the foundation, and you're not increasing the design flow, you don't need a wastewater permit. If you're keeping this a 3-bedroom and you're adding 1 bedroom, then we kind of go back to square one. This needs a compliant leach field. This needs a replacement area. Well needs to be compliant. So,
If you did an attached addition and added a bedroom, do you have to have a second leach field?
not necessarily, but here's the kicker. So you're increasing the design flow? Yeah. So the wastewater coming out of this portion has to go to a fully compliant leach field. So this is another common question I get is, we're increasing the design flow and we just want to send it to our existing leach field. Then the question becomes, is your existing leach field compliant? And if your leach field wasn't engineered, I've yet to see one that meets city rules. It just doesn't. They weren't built, for protecting the environment. They were built for convenience and cost. And that's just this way it was. If this is fully compliant, or if you have an engineered system, sometimes the designer can, make it a little bigger. But most of the time, I have yet to see one where an existing grant population meets the rules. So most of the time, it's going to have its own deal.
Got a question?
Should we open it up for questions and I'm going to try to repeat the question so that the recording captures it. Thank you very much, Patrick. I feel like you might have a lot more questions. Yeah, so I think we'll have about, let's start with about 10 minutes for questions as we're all assembled, and then we'll see where we're at then, and maybe we'll break for more informal, targeted questions. So Liz, yes.
It's a kind of yes or no question. Let's say you have a house and you change the garage into this extra 1-bedroom unit. That could also have a kitchen and a bath in it. That would, if you took away the 1-bedroom in the 3-bedroom house.
That's correct, yeah, you can build your ADU over the top of your garage. Yep.
So the question was about building, I think you kind of answered
You talked
it.
about bedrooms, but it also you can have a bathroom in the kitchen.
Right, right. Thanks. Other questions? Yes?
What happens with your water supply if it's a spring?
So the question is, what happens with the water supply if it's a spring?
So springs are tough. They have huge setbacks, and very often it's hard to get a good, clean water sample out of them. Most of them come back with bacteria. Even if you're drinking, coliform bacteria, you may never notice that it's in there, but it's hard to get a good water supply or a good, clean sample out of a spring. And it's hard to find a compliant spring because their setbacks to leach fields are so huge. It's 500 feet in the uphill direction and 150 feet.
I got that, and it tests on me.
Okay, yeah, if you have a compliant spring, it's, you can do it.
But it doesn't do 10 gallons.
So that's where we'd have to figure that out, yeah.
So the question was about the gallons per minute of the spring in addition to the how it tests. Thanks. Other questions? Yes.
Maybe you can enlarge your leach field, but what about your septic tank?
So the question is, maybe you can enlarge your leach field, but what about the septic tank?
So it depends on how far away the ADU is. If it's more than 20 or 30 feet away, I would personally give it its own septic tank. And you're going back to the existing leach field, you said? Yeah. So I would personally, if it's more than 20 feet away, say, I would give it its own tank, just to make it a better system. And but theoretically, you could run a pipe, from your foundation to the existing septic tank as well. I don't think there's a rule that would prohibit you from doing that.
It's on the other side of the house.
That could be a problem, yeah.
Are there other questions? Yes.
So, as somebody with kids in school, I would love to be able to do this so more families could move to the area. I mean, we don't even have a soccer team. Like, we need more kids so that there's kids to fill up the classroom. So I guess I see you talking a lot about 1 bedrooms, but does it still max out at 50,000 even if you're interested in doing a 3 or 4 bedroom?
Yes.
So I'm just going to repeat the question for the recording. So the comment is, we're interested in seeing more kids and families in our schools, and so what are the rules around numbers of bedrooms?
Larger.
Yeah, larger bedroom sizes for an ADU.
And then I think even outside of this conversation, this is something I've realized is a need for a while, but I've been so terrified by the renters' rights in Vermont. Like, I've been told, people can pay their rent the first month and then never pay again, and you're never going to get them out of there. So can you talk to me a little bit about that? And these are the things that I hear. I don't think it's true.
Yeah,
So the additional question is about renters' rights in Vermont.
So there are some landlords associations that can really speak and advocate for landlords, and I think it's a good resource for folks who are considering it to talk to other landlords. I mean, they'll share their success stories and their horror stories. I think there are different experiences. If you're on site, things tend to go a little easier than if you're living, a community away or a state away. I think lots of it has to do with your screening in advance, checking references. These are just things you do if you had any rental property, or I'd recommend that you would do. So there are some best practices. If you're thinking about rental units, an accessory dwelling unit is probably a good way to get into it.
Patrick?
Yeah, so I have a question. Can you hand pick who your tenant is going to be, or is that imposed upon?
So for the accessory dwelling unit, you can choose your tenant. You can. And so fair housing rules apply for any property where the owner is not the occupant and or has more than 3 units.
Jacob.
Kind of piggybacking on that, can you choose any contractors that you want? do the work.
Yeah,
So the
we-
question is, I'm just gonna repeat, can you choose any contractors that you want to do the work?
Yes, so they have to be insured, they have to be licensed with the state, but you're actually going to get estimates. So that is part of your due diligence, that when you come to us, you've done your design work, you've identified what you want.
And you have to go with the lowest bid?
Make your argument, lowest responsible bid.
So the question was about the lowest bid in the back, yes.
I want to better understand the word accessory. So first of all, if there's a house, can you build the unit, say, a long ways away from the house and then in 5 years sell it? Or could I buy a piece of land and buy build two accessory?
No,
So this is clarification around accessory and how close together or not the units need to be.
Yeah, so in the packets we had for a handout, there are frequently asked questions that really talk about the definition. And so it is on the same parcel, and this is a 5-year restriction. So the owner is applying for it and is going to use it as a rental unit for 5 years. That covenant goes away after 5 years. So in year 6, if you were able to then subdivide your property and separate that, but then you want to consider, what is your water and your wastewater system if you're going to subdivide. So there are all considerations that you'd make based on both, just as we talked about the bedroom allocation, your immediate term planning and your long-term planning. And just one other thing about the accessory dwelling unit and 3 or 4 bedroom units. The accessory dwelling unit is going to have to be smaller than your primary residence. So, if you're adding a 3-bedroom unit, you're going to have at least the same amount of bedrooms and more square footage in your own unit.
Mr. Stoner.
There's been a lot of changes in the septic rules over the last several decades. There's been a lot of changes in what the outlook is from the state and how much housing that we need in the state. I'm looking for the longer-term future, even at my age, and I'm curious as to whether you have any insight at all or have any discussions about what changes we might be able to expect in the future, like lessening some of the rules, encouraging in different ways from the state.
This is a question about the state's rules around septics and how those might change in the future given the current housing needs and likely future needs. Did I capture that?
Perfect.
Okay, thanks.
So I personally don't see an easing of the rules for on-site wastewater and water supply systems. I don't think it's in the cards. I might be wrong, but what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing a lot of people talking about, including state people, is sewering villages. Get rid of these on-site systems in concentrated population areas. Like Greensboro is a classic one that, 5 times a year I get calls from people. It's like, when are they going to put sewer in? Because there's no development is going to happen in Greensboro until there's a sewer system. There's just no capacity for on-site systems. So they're dead in the water until that happens. And so there's a lot of incentive in the villages. And that's, if you look at regional plans, a lot of them, that's the crux of it, is we want to develop these village centers and, leave all this beautiful land, kind of the way we like it, basically. So that's where I see things going is villages, sewering, basically putting in municipal sewer systems. And probably water systems too. Well, Greensboro already has a water system, but of course it takes a critical mass of people to pay for a system like that.
Let's take a couple other questions. One, and you had one in the back. Go ahead.
Just a clarification and a question. The ADU has to be the same or smaller? Like if the primary has 3 bedrooms, can the ADU have 3 bedrooms?
Yeah, it's right. So your square footage has got to be clear that one is primary. So there's going to be some.
And do you have to have a general contractor? Can you be your own contractor and sub out all if you have experience in contracting?
So there are
question
different-
is about whether you need a general contractor or whether you can sub it out as.
Yeah, so there are different ways that we can look at it, and that's sort of where we have the discussion. And it depends, again, on the licensure qualifications.
Thanks. We had one there and then Nomi. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm asking a little bit of the same question that she is, but also, in Healthy Home, does it address radon?
So the question is, does Healthy Homes address radon?
Not to my knowledge.
Yeah, I believe it's limited to water and sewer, not air quality.
So if I have built my own home, and I have built my own home, I have to be licensed to do anything?
So the question is, if you build your own home, do you have to be licensed to also build an ADU?
Well, so there are requirements. Part of the goal is we want to make sure that the project is actually completed. So there are components that, yes, you're going to have licensed plumbing and electrical and HVAC, and that's where there's part of the discussion.
We have one there, and then we'll go to you. Yes. Go ahead.
Does the current ADU grant program allow for what it sounds like Jean did, where if you have a 3-bedroom home and you add a separate 1-bedroom unit, removing one of the bedrooms from the home, can you then move into the ADU essentially and rent out the larger homes?
So there's been some question with that. Based on the current definition, you cannot. The owner-occupied unit is the larger one.
You could after 5 years, though.
You could after 5 years, yes.
Go ahead.
I just want to clarify, your question. Are you saying that the requirements about ADU or the requirements for grants for ADU?
This is a question.
For the grant program.
So it's you privately fund. I think we need to sort of clarify.
Thank
one
you.
is about a grant and one is about just the units and things.
Yeah, so the clarification is that there are different requirements for the grant program than there are for building ADUs in general, correct?
Right.
Right, okay, thanks. Are there any questions from anybody who hasn't asked a question yet? Okay, let's have one final question and then I'll have a brief closing remark and then we'll break for informal discussion.
It's what you said about the owner has to live in the main house. Well, I would think in a lot of cases with older people, if the older people want to move into the ADU and the old house the big house would be lived in by the children, okay, grandchildren possibly. And that sounds like that's not allowed.
That is not the way both the definition of accessory dwelling unit was written by the legislature or the program was designed. Now, if you wanted to do that, you would be eligible for the VHIP program, which has different restrictions and less assistance.
But I just read my AARP magazine and all of the examples in there, the old folks are in the little one. And that would be great.
And I think that goes to the point about the different vehicles for building an ADU, I think, right? So you look like you had one final question?
Well, maybe along those lines, how long must you be the owner of the primary residence before you apply for the program?
So this is how long must you own the primary residence before you can apply for the grant program?
As long as it's your primary residence.
Yeah. So, with that, I want to first thank our panelists so much. And they will stick around for about 15 or 20 minutes, 20 minutes I'd say probably, to answer questions informally. I want to thank the church for hosting us and for getting these conversations going. And I want to thank the people, there are many people who worked on this. I want to name Ann Hansen and Mary Lou Rylands and Ann, Wishnick, who's here at the refreshment table. Thanks for those of you who brought refreshments, and I would invite everybody to please enjoy them and stay tuned for whatever we might come up with next. Thanks everyone for being here.